The words hung in the humid July air like cheap perfume. Karen, president of the estates at Willow Creek Homeowners Association, stood on the edge of my property with a thick binder clutched to her chest like a shield. She was flanked by two men in bright orange vests holding survey equipment, their faces carefully blank. Her floral print dress was a garish splash of color against the deep green of my blueberry fields. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the 10-acre parcel my grandfather had planted 70 years ago. "This entire section," she declared, her voice ringing with the unearned authority of a petty tyrant, "will be graded and gravel surfaced for community overflow parking. We have the Founders' Day Gala next month, and our residents simply cannot be expected to park on the street." She smiled, a thin, self-satisfied line that didn't reach her eyes. The smile of someone who had never been told no, and had no intention of starting now. The sheer unmitigated audacity of it felt like a physical blow. This wasn't just land. It was my family's legacy, my retirement, my peace. And she was talking about paving it for a party. She had no idea what she had just started. "My name is John Miller, retired Master Gunnery Sergeant, United States Marine Corps. 30 years of service." And what Karen had just done was declare war on a man who had spent his entire life fighting for things he believed in. I believed in this land. My property, all 60 acres of it, was not and had never been part of her shiny new HOA. My farm was here long before the first McMansion foundation was ever poured in Willow Creek. The access road we shared was a county easement, not her private driveway. I had checked the deeds, the county records, and the original plat maps myself before they ever broke ground on that plastic paradise next door. I took a slow, deliberate breath, the kind a master gunnery sergeant takes before addressing a platoon of undisciplined recruits. "Karen," I said, my voice dangerously calm, "you are trespassing. And those men," I nodded toward the surveyors, "are aiding in that trespass. You have exactly 60 seconds to get off my property before I call the sheriff." Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Don't be ridiculous, Mr. Miller. We have a legal right. Section 4, subsection C of the county's Community Development Ordinance of 1998 allows for the appropriation of underutilized agricultural parcels for essential community infrastructure. Your field has been designated as such by the HOA Architectural Review Committee." She tapped the binder. "It's all in here. Perfectly legal. We'll even compensate you at the county-assessed agricultural land value. It's quite generous, really." Underutilized. The word echoed in my mind. I was up before dawn every single day tending these bushes. I had spent the last 5 years and a small fortune getting this field USDA certified organic. A process so grueling it made boot camp look like a vacation. Every drop of water, every nutrient, every pest control measure was documented and scrutinized under federal law. This land wasn't underutilized. It was the most meticulously managed 60 acres in the entire state. "That ordinance," I said, stepping forward until the ancient rusted barbed wire fence was the only thing between us, "applies to unincorporated county land zoned for transition. This is a multi-generational, privately owned, federally certified agricultural operation. You don't have a legal leg to stand on, and your committee has no authority here." Her face hardened. The faux neighborly facade melted away to reveal the granite entitlement beneath. "You can hire all the lawyers you want, old man. This is happening. The preliminary grading is scheduled for Monday. You can either accept our generous offer or we'll see you in court after the fact. By then, the parking lot will already be built." She turned on her heel and left, her surveyors scurrying after her like pilot fish. I stood there long after her car had disappeared, the dust settling on the quiet county road. The air still smelled of her perfume. Monday. They were bringing bulldozers on Monday. She thought this was a battle over a field. She had no idea she had just declared war on a man who had spent his entire life fighting for things he believed in. And panic was not in my operational vocabulary. Assessment, planning, execution. That was the rhythm I had lived by for 30 years. My first move was not to a lawyer but to my office, a small wood-paneled room at the back of the farmhouse. The walls were covered not with medals or military photographs, but with topographical maps of my land, soil composition charts, and framed certificates. The most important one hung directly over my desk, the official USDA organic certification. It had taken 5 years of blood, sweat, and paperwork to earn. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a binding contract with the federal government. I pulled out the massive 3-ring binder containing every document related to that certification, thicker, I was pleased to note, than Karen's pathetic HOA rule book. Soil purity tests, water source evaluations, lists of approved organic inputs, annual inspection reports. The language was dense, bureaucratic, and absolute. The certified land was designated for a single specific purpose: the cultivation of organic blueberries under strict federal guidelines. Any alteration to the land's composition, any change in its fundamental use, say, the petrochemicals dripping from 1,000 minivans, would immediately invalidate the certification. More than that, it would trigger a federal investigation and potentially massive fines for anyone who caused the violation. I felt a grim smile touch my lips for the first time that day. Karen, in her infinite wisdom, hadn't just picked a fight with a retired Marine. She had picked a fight with the United States Department of Agriculture. My next call was to the county records office. I spoke with a clerk named Mary, whose voice sounded as dry as the ancient deeds she filed. I asked for the full history of the ordinance Karen had cited, Community Development Ordinance 1998-4C. Mary was quiet for a moment. "That's an odd one to ask about, sir," she said finally. "That ordinance was part of a package for the Old Ridge View Development Project. It was highly specific to that parcel and was superseded by the Unified Development Code in 2005. It hasn't been legally enforceable for almost 20 years. Karen wasn't just misinterpreting an ordinance. She was citing one that was legally defunct. She had built her entire legal threat on a ghost. It was sloppy, arrogant, and exactly the kind of fatal mistake a bully makes when they assume their opponent won't fight back. I spent the rest of the afternoon making copies, my deed, the plat map showing my property lines clearly established in 1948, the current zoning laws for my parcel, agricultural exclusive, and the first 20 pages of my USDA certification binder with all the land use restriction sections highlighted. Then I drove into town and found a notary public at the local bank. I had her notarize a formal cease and desist letter I had drafted myself, citing Karen's trespass, her reliance on a defunct ordinance, and the potential for federal violations against my certified organic farm. The letter was polite, professional, and utterly uncompromising. It stated that any attempt by the HOA or its contractors to enter my property or alter my land in any way would be met with immediate legal action seeking full compensatory and punitive damages. I made 3 copies. One for Karen. One for the HOA's management company. One for my records. I wasn't going to wait for Monday. I was going on the offensive. That evening I drove to the grand, gaudy entrance of the estates at Willow Creek. No guard gate, just a ridiculously oversized sign and a fountain. Karen's house was easy to find, the largest one with a 3-car garage and a small tasteful sign near the door reading, Karen Miller, HOA President. I walked up the driveway and taped the notarized letter squarely to her front door. The response was faster than I expected. My phone rang at 6 the next morning. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked, her voice a shrill instrument of pure indignation. "Taping this ridiculous threatening letter to my door, this is harassment." I was already out in the field, a mug of black coffee in my hand, watching the sunrise paint the sky orange and purple over my blueberry bushes. "Good morning, Karen," I said calmly. "I just wanted to make sure you received my official response to your threats of yesterday. Since you plan on bringing heavy machinery to my property line on Monday, I felt a certain urgency was required." There was a sputtering sound on the line. "A defunct ordinance? Federal certification? You think some piece of paper about your little hobby farm is going to stop the progress of this community?" Hobby farm. That one stung. But I didn't let it show. "It's not just a piece of paper, Karen. It's federal law. The same way tax law isn't just a suggestion. If one of your bulldozers so much as scrapes the topsoil of that certified field, Your board, and the company you hired could be facing penalties from the USDA that would make your HOA's entire annual budget look like pocket change. I'm not just talking fines. I'm talking about potential land remediation costs ordered by a federal judge. The silence on the other end was deeply satisfying. I could almost hear the gears grinding as she tried to process a threat that didn't come from her own playbook of fines and bylaws. "You're bluffing," she finally said. But the sharp edge of certainty had left her voice. In its place was a thin thread of doubt. "I'm a retired master gunnery sergeant," I replied, my voice dropping to the low, even tone I use for delivering immutable facts. "We don't bluff." I hung up. The calm didn't last. By noon, a letter arrived via certified mail from the HOA's law firm, a masterpiece of legalese, full of whereas and heretofore clauses. The gist was simple. They acknowledged my letter but rejected its claims, asserting that their interpretation of the spirit of the county's development goals gave them the authority they needed. They called my USDA certification a private agricultural matter, with no bearing on their community infrastructure project. They were doubling down. But there was a new element. The letter also included a $500 fine for unauthorized signage, citing the notarized letter I had taped to Karen's door. It was petty. It was absurd. And it was a declaration that they intended to fight this not on legal merits but through a campaign of bureaucratic harassment. They were trying to bleed me dry with paper cuts. That was when I knew I needed allies. I logged onto the local community social media page, a place I usually avoided like the plague, mostly populated by posts about lost cats and plumber recommendations. After some digging I found what I was looking for. A thread from 3 months ago titled, HOA Overreach. It was a gold mine. Dozens of comments from residents. A retired school teacher fined for a wind chime deemed excessively melodic. A young couple ordered to rip out a vegetable garden from their backyard because it violated the aesthetic uniformity of the neighborhood. And then I found him, a user called legal_eagle_88, who had posted a long, detailed breakdown of how the HOA was misapplying its own bylaws to levy exorbitant fines. His name was Arthur Chin. 30 years old, corporate lawyer, moved to Willow Creek a year ago. His parents, who lived in the same development, had been fined thousands of dollars for having the wrong shade of beige paint on their shutters. His post was smart, well-reasoned, and full of righteous anger. I sent him a private message, laid out the facts in plain language, attached a digital copy of my cease and desist and the law firm's response, and ended with a simple question. "Does this sound familiar to you?" His reply came in under 5 minutes. "Mr. Miller, I've been waiting for someone like you. When can we meet?" We met the next day at a small coffee shop in town, far from the prying eyes of Willow Creek. Arthur Chen was younger than I expected. Sharp suit, sharper mind, a stack of documents that rivaled my own. "My parents are good people," he said, pushing a file across the table toward me. "They bought that house to be closer to their grandkids. Then Karen got elected president. She runs the board like it's her personal kingdom. She targets anyone who questions her, uses the bylaws as a weapon. The fines for my parents' shutters were just the beginning. She's put liens on 3 houses for things as trivial as leaving a trash can out an hour too long." He opened the file. Letters, fine notices, angry emails from other residents. A pattern of abuse as clear as a map. "The problem," Arthur explained, "is that everyone is afraid to fight back alone. The HOA has a law firm on retainer, paid for by our own dues. They use it to intimidate residents into compliance. It's cheaper to just pay the ridiculous fine than to hire a lawyer to fight it." Then he read through my paperwork. His eyes lit up as he got to the defunct ordinance and the USDA certification. A slow grin spread across his face. "This is different," he said. "This isn't about the color of a mailbox. You're not even a member. She has no jurisdiction. And the federal angle," he leaned forward, his voice dropping. "She's given you the perfect weapon. She thinks she's fighting a zoning dispute. You can turn this into a federal case." He set down the papers. "The key is to let her make the first move. A physical one." I looked at him. "You want me to let them start digging?" The thought of a bulldozer blade touching my soil made my gut clench. Not just digging, Arthur said. We need them to commit a clear, documented act of trespass and property damage on the certified land. Photos, video, a sheriff's deputy as a witness. Right now it's just letters and threats. We need to bait the trap. He paused. We let her think she's won. Let her get arrogant. Let her parade her victory in front of the whole community. And then when she's at her most triumphant, we drop the hammer. Not just on the HOA, but on her personally. Board members can be held personally liable for knowingly authorizing an action that violates federal law. The plan was audacious. It required the kind of patience and nerve that felt familiar to me, like waiting in a blind for an enemy patrol. We spent 2 hours mapping it out. Arthur would quietly reach out to other disgruntled residents, building a coalition, and draft the real legal firepower, a full lawsuit and an emergency injunction ready to file the moment they broke ground. My job was to play the part of the stubborn old farmer being slowly worn down. I would send one more letter, carefully worded, drafted by Arthur writing pro bono, reiterating my position but offering to discuss a potential boundary adjustment in good faith. It was a feint, a gesture designed to look like weakening resolve. She won't be able to resist, Arthur predicted. She'll schedule a big show of it. Announce it at the next HOA meeting, make it the centerpiece of her president's report. We need to be there for that. Getting into an HOA meeting as a non-resident was tricky, but Arthur had a contact. Mrs. Gable, the retired school teacher fined for her wind chimes. She was happy to sign me in as her guest. The final piece was the USDA. I called the regional certification office and spoke to a man named Davidson, a field agent who had conducted my last 2 annual inspections. David was a stickler for the rules, a man who lived and breathed the federal code. I explained the situation. He was silent for a long moment. Mr. Miller, he said finally, his voice tight with bureaucratic outrage, this is a serious threat to a certified operation. The integrity of the USDA organic seal is paramount. I told him the plan, wait for them to break ground, then call him immediately. He was hesitant, worried about potential contamination. Sir, if they damage that soil it could take years to recertify. I understand the risk, David. But this woman and her board won't stop unless they face consequences they cannot ignore. A warning letter won't do it. I need you to be ready. When I call, I need an official USDA representative on site as quickly as possible to document the violation. Another pause. Then, I'll be on standby. I'll have a draft notice of violation and penalty schedule ready to go. The moment you have photographic evidence, send it to me. The penalties for willful destruction of a certified organic operation are not trivial. They start in the 5-figure range and go up very, very quickly. The trap was set. All the pieces were in place. Now we just had to wait for the mouse to take the cheese. The week leading up to the HOA meeting was a masterclass in watching a bully overreach. Karen, emboldened by my offer to discuss the matter, ramped everything up. Flyers appeared on the community bulletin board announcing the Willow Creek Community Enhancement Project, complete with a poorly photoshopped architect's rendering of a gravel lot where my blueberry field should be. The flyer touted the new, convenient parking for the Founders' Day Gala and thanked President Karen Miller for her visionary leadership. It was nauseating. The HOA's lawyers sent another letter formally rejecting my offer and announcing they would move forward with the original plan. They graciously informed me they would drop the $500 fine if I ceased all further antagonistic communications. They thought I was beaten. Meanwhile, Arthur was working behind the scenes, meeting with 6 targeted families, collecting their stories and fine notices, building a case file documenting a systemic pattern of abuse of power. Ann Mark, a tech-savvy resident fined for a satellite dish visible from the street, offered to discreetly record the HOA meeting on his phone. The night of the meeting, I put on a plain collared shirt and clean jeans. Mrs. Gable met me in the parking lot of the community clubhouse. "I can't believe she's doing this to you, John," she whispered, her hands trembling slightly. "That farm has been there forever. She's a monster." "Tonight," I said, "we just listen." The clubhouse meeting room was beige and soulless, filled with uncomfortable folding chairs. About 40 residents were there. Karen sat at a long table at the front with the other 4 board members, who all looked either terrified of her or bored out of their minds. She ran the meeting with an iron fist, shutting down questions she didn't like with a sharp rap of her gavel. Finally she arrived at the main event, the president's report. She stood up and beamed at the crowd. "Friends, neighbors, I have a wonderful announcement regarding our upcoming Founders' Day Gala. As you know, parking has always been a challenge. But thanks to the board's tireless efforts, we have secured a permanent solution." She clicked a remote. The amateurish rendering of the gravel parking lot appeared on the projector screen behind her. A few people clapped uncertainly. Through a long-neglected county ordinance, we have been able to acquire the use of the adjacent underutilized agricultural plot to create the Willow Creek Community Parking Annex. This will provide over 200 much-needed spaces for our events. She paused for dramatic effect. Now, the owner of the property was initially uncooperative. A few people chuckled. He made some rather outlandish claims, sent some very nasty letters, but after our lawyers explained the legal realities, he has seen the light and agreed to cooperate with this vital community project. My blood ran cold. She was lying, bald-faced, to the entire community, painting me as a defeated crank to cement her own power. It was more perfect than I could have imagined. A man in the back raised his hand. "Karen, what did we have to pay for the land? Is this going to raise our dues?" Karen waved a dismissive hand. "A mere formality. The compensation is set by the county at a standard agricultural rate. It's a negligible cost for such a massive benefit to our property values. A complete fabrication." She then announced the groundbreaking ceremony. "To celebrate this momentous achievement, we will have a small ceremony next Monday morning at 9 a.m. coffee and donuts, and our contractor will break ground on the new annex. I encourage you all to come witness this new chapter in the history of Willow Creek." The meeting ended and people filed out buzzing about the new parking lot. Karen was preening, accepting congratulations from her devotees. She had walked right into the center of the trap and pulled the pin on the grenade herself. She hadn't just announced her intentions. She had publicly lied, misrepresented a legal situation, and invited the entire community to witness her crime. Monday couldn't come soon enough. The weekend was the longest of my life. I walked the perimeter of the field a dozen times a day, the scent of ripening blueberries filling the air, a sensory anchor, a reminder of exactly what I was fighting for. Arthur and I had a final strategy session Sunday night. The injunction papers were ready to file. Mark had sent us a crystal-clear audio recording of the meeting. Mrs. Gable and 3 other residents agreed to be present Monday as witnesses. I had spoken to the sheriff's department, not to press charges, but to request a civil standby. I explained that I was anticipating a property dispute with a neighboring HOA and wanted an officer present to keep the peace. Deputy Miller, no relation, a strange coincidence that made me smile, said he'd be there at 8:45. My final call was to David Chen at the USDA. "It's happening tomorrow morning at 9. I'll be 2 towns over on a scheduled inspection," he said. "I can be at your property in under an hour from the moment you call. Remember, I need clear, undeniable evidence of them disturbing soil on the certified parcel. Get me that, and I can bring the full power of the federal government to your front gate." Monday morning arrived with pale sun fighting through the morning haze. At 8:45, Deputy Miller's cruiser pulled quietly into my driveway. He was a big, calm man with a slow smile. I showed him my property markers and the certified letters I had sent. "So you just want me to stand here and watch?" he asked. "That's it, Deputy. Just be a witness." Right on cue, the circus arrived. A small convoy of cars pulled up along the county road. Karen stepped out of her oversized SUV dressed in a bright yellow pantsuit, looking, I couldn't help but think, like a deranged canary. About 15 residents milled about holding paper cups of coffee. Then a large flatbed truck rumbled up and stopped. On its back was a small bright orange bobcat bulldozer. The driver, a weary-looking man in a greasy baseball cap, hopped out and began unchaining it. Karen gathered her flock at the edge of my property, just on the other side of the old wire fence. She saw Deputy Miller's car in my driveway but seemed unconcerned, likely assuming I had called him in a last-ditch effort to intimidate her. She raised a portable megaphone to her lips. "Welcome, everyone, to a historic day for the estates at Willow Creek," she bellowed across the quiet morning. "Today we break ground on a project that demonstrates our community's commitment to progress." She gestured grandly at my field. I stood on my side of the fence, arms crossed. Mrs. Gable and my other witnesses stood a respectful distance behind me. Arthur was parked down the road, out of sight, waiting for my signal. Karen gave me a smug, pitying look. "Mr. Miller is here to watch the proceedings. We're so glad he could come appreciate this wonderful new addition." The Bobcat driver walked over to Karen. "Where do you want me to start, ma'am?" Karen pointed directly at the corner of my field, at a wooden stake topped with a bright pink ribbon her surveyors had illegally placed the week before. "Start right there. Scrape about 6 inches of topsoil off that whole corner section, about 50 by 50 feet. We need to clear it for the gravel base." The driver nodded, climbed into the Bobcat, and fired it up with a belch of diesel smoke. My heart was pounding, a steady, rhythmic drum against my ribs. The little machine lurched forward, its metal tracks clattering. It crossed the invisible property line. I raised my phone, camera already recording. The driver lowered the front bucket. With a metallic groan, the steel blade bit into the rich, dark soil of my organic farm, tearing through the delicate clover cover crop I had planted to enrich the earth, scraping a long, ugly brown scar into the green landscape, piling up a mound of dirt that had taken years to cultivate to federal standards. I had my evidence. I made 2 calls. The first to Arthur, "Execute." The second to David Chin, "The violation is in progress." Then I started walking, calm and deliberate, toward the fence. I reached it just as the Bobcat was reversing to take another scoop. I didn't shout. I didn't run. I simply stood there, my shadow falling across the fresh scar in the earth. Deputy Miller, seeing me move, got out of his cruiser and began walking slowly toward the scene. "That's enough," I said. My voice carried easily in the quiet morning air. The driver stopped, looking confused. Karen marched over to the fence, her face a mask of triumphant fury. "You can't stop this, Miller. It's happening. Get back on your porch before I have you arrested for interfering." "Actually, ma'am," Deputy Miller said, his voice a low, unhurried rumble as he came to stand beside me, "this is his property. You and this vehicle are the ones trespassing." Karen whirled on him. "I have a right. It's in the county ordinance." "The ordinance from 1998 that was rescinded in 2005? I asked pleasantly. "Or are you referring to a different one?" The color drained from Karen's face. She opened her mouth, but before she could speak, a sleek black sedan pulled up and Arthur Chin stepped out holding his briefcase. He walked with the brisk, confident stride of a man who knows he holds all the cards. "Karen Miller," he said, though he knew perfectly well who she was. "My name is Arthur Chin. I represent the owner of this property, Mr. John Miller. You and the entire board of the estates at Willow Creek HOA are hereby served." He opened his briefcase and produced a thick sheath of papers, which he handed to a stunned Karen. "That is a lawsuit for trespass, property damage, and a request for an emergency injunction to halt all further activity. It was electronically filed with the county court 5 minutes ago." Karen stared at the papers as if they were a live grenade. "Oh, you can't," she stammered. This is community business." "It became my business when you targeted my client," Arthur said coolly. "And it's about to become the business of the federal government as well." On cue, a dark green Ford sedan with official government plates pulled up behind Arthur's car. David Chin from the USDA stepped out wearing a crisp official polo shirt with the department seal on the chest. He held a clipboard and a digital camera. He walked past all of us without a word, went straight to the scar in the ground, and began photographing it from multiple angles. He knelt, took a soil sample, placed it in a sterile bag. Karen and her followers watched with their jaws open. The festive atmosphere of coffee and donuts had evaporated entirely, replaced by a thick, heavy silence. David finally walked over to the group. "Who is in charge here?" His eyes scanned the crowd and landed on Karen, who was still holding the lawsuit like a dead thing. I am, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I am the president of the Homeowners Association. David made a note on his clipboard. Ma'am, my name is David Chin. I am a field agent for the United States Department of Agriculture. You have just directed a contractor to knowingly damage a federally certified USDA organic agricultural operation. This is a direct violation of Title VII of the Code of Federal Regulations, Section 205.203. He spoke with the passionless precision of a man reciting federal scripture. This violation carries a civil penalty of up to $11,000 per infraction. Given the premeditated nature of this event, I can assure you my office will be recommending the maximum penalty. Furthermore, the HOA as the authorizing body will be held liable for all costs associated with soil remediation and the multi-year process of recertifying this parcel. A conservative estimate for that process would be in the low six figures. A collective gasp moved through the small crowd of residents. One of the board members, a mousy-looking man who hadn't spoken all morning, looked like he was going to be sick. David wasn't finished. We will also be opening an investigation into whether this action constitutes willful destruction of a federally protected agricultural entity, which could open the door to criminal charges. A full report will be on my supervisor's desk by noon. He turned and looked at the Bobcat driver. And you, sir, your company is also liable. I'd advise you to shut down that machine and remove it from this property immediately. The driver didn't need to be told twice. He killed the engine, scrambled to load the Bobcat back onto the flatbed, and was gone in a cloud of dust and barely contained panic, leaving Karen and her followers standing in stunned silence on the county road. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The lawsuit Arthur filed was airtight, and the USDA violation was the nail in the coffin. The HOA's law firm, upon reviewing the evidence, the defunct ordinance, the federal certification, the video of the groundbreaking, the impending USDA fines, immediately advised the board to settle. But it was the social and political fallout within Willow Creek that truly sealed Karen's fate. The story spread through the development like wildfire. The residents who had come for donuts went home with a story of epic mismanagement and federal intervention. Mark posted his audio recording of the HOA meeting, where Karen had lied about my cooperation and downplayed the costs, to the community's private social media page. It was an instant bombshell. People were furious. Not just about the potential six-figure liability about to send their HOA dues into the stratosphere. They were angry about the lies, the arrogance, the years of petty tyranny that had finally culminated in this public disaster. The narrative Karen had so carefully constructed, the stubborn old farmer blocking community progress, was shattered completely. The new narrative wrote itself. A power-mad HOA president had picked a fight with a respected veteran to build a parking lot they didn't need, and in doing so had nearly bankrupted the entire community through her own incompetence and ego. An emergency meeting was called for Thursday night, not by Karen, but by a petition signed by over 100 residents, a legal maneuver Arthur had helped them draft. The purpose was singular, a vote of no confidence and the removal of the entire board. I attended that meeting not as a guest, but as an invited speaker. The clubhouse was packed. People were standing along the walls and spilling into the hallway. The air was electric with anger. Karen and her board sat at the front table, but they looked smaller now. Diminished. They weren't authority figures anymore. They were defendants at their own trial. Resident after resident stood up to speak. Mrs. Gable talked about the culture of fear Karen had created. The young couple described being forced to rip out their children's vegetable garden. Mark talked about the satellite dish. Arthur's parents talked about the shutter paint. Story after story poured out. A litany of petty abuses borne in silence for too long. My story was just the one that had finally broken the dam. Then it was my turn. I didn't raise my voice. I stood at the podium and laid out the facts. I talked about my grandfather planting the first blueberry bush on that land. I talked about the 5 years of work to earn the organic certification, what it meant, not just as a label but as a commitment to a way of farming, a promise made to the land itself. I explained what Karen had actually done, not just trespassed on my property, but tried to take a piece of my family's history and turn it into a gravel lot out of convenience and ego. She had risked this entire community's financial solvency by ignoring repeated warnings, relying on laws that didn't exist, and arrogantly assuming that federal regulations were just a private matter she could override with a PowerPoint slide and a megaphone. This was never about parking, I said, looking directly at Karen. It was about power. And when someone is given a little bit of power, their true character is revealed. You've all seen her character. Now you get to decide if it's what you want leading your community. The vote was nearly unanimous. Karen was removed as president. The other board members who had blindly supported her were removed as well. It was a brutal public humiliation. She didn't say a word. She simply gathered her things, her face a pale, tight mask, and walked out of the room to a chorus of stony silence. A new interim board was elected on the spot, led by Mrs. Gable. Her first act as president was to formally apologize to me on behalf of the community. In the weeks that followed, the legal dust settled. The new HOA board, guided by Arthur, entered into a settlement agreement. They paid for the full cost of soil remediation, certified organic topsoil and compost brought in to repair the scar the bobcat had made. They paid all of my legal fees. And they paid a significant sum in punitive damages, which I immediately donated to a local veteran support charity. The USDA levied its fine against the HOA, but after negotiations and a clear demonstration of the new board's cooperative spirit, they agreed to a structured payment plan that wouldn't completely bankrupt the community. Karen, facing personal liability in the lawsuit and complete ostracization from the neighborhood she had once ruled, sold her house at a loss and moved away within 2 months. I never saw her again. Life returned to a new kind of normal. The ugly brown scar on my land slowly healed, covered with fresh soil and a new planting of clover. The relationship between my farm and the estates at Willow Creek was transformed. Mrs. Gable and the new board were respectful, communicative, committed to being genuine neighbors. They organized a volunteer day where residents came and helped spread mulch around the blueberry bushes, a quiet, symbolic act of peace and restoration. A few months later, during the peak of the harvest season, I put up a small hand-painted sign at the end of my driveway. Miller Family Farm USDA Organic Blueberries You Pick Saturday's Neighbors Welcome. That first Saturday, dozens of families from Willow Creek came. Their children ran through the rows of bushes, laughing as they filled their buckets. They weren't just customers. They were neighbors. They were the community Karen had claimed to be serving. A community she had never really understood. Standing there watching a young father from the house next door show his daughter how to find the darkest, ripest berry, I felt a sense of peace that was deeper than just the absence of conflict. It was the quiet, profound satisfaction of having defended not just a piece of land, but a principle. The victory of patience over aggression, of integrity over entitlement, of a man who knew exactly what he was fighting for, and refused to stop fighting until he had won. The berries that year were the sweetest they had ever been. If this story hit something in you, if you have ever stood on ground that mattered and refused to give it up, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Because the lesson my grandfather taught me when he planted the first bush on that land is the same lesson I took into every operation for 30 years. Know your ground, know your rights, and never let anyone tell you what you're worth. Not even someone with a megaphone and a yellow pants suit.